If you're a man who's ever wondered why some older men who aren't the richest, the tallest, or the most charming, effortlessly attract younger women without even trying, then stop whatever you're doing and listen closely. Because what I'm about to tell you is not what you hear in typical dating videos. It's not what influencers preach, and it's definitely not what society wants you to understand. This will challenge your beliefs, expose your blind spots, and show you a truth most men never realize in their entire lifetime. You think attraction is about looks. You think it's about youth. You think it's about status, luck, or money. It's not. There's a deeper psychology at play, something most men overlook because they're too busy competing in the wrong areas. Meanwhile, the men who truly understand this are operating on a completely different level. They walk into a room and instantly command attention without speaking. They create attraction without chasing. They build connections without forcing anything, and younger women notice them not because of age, but because of something far more powerful. I'm going to break down these overlooked traits, these specific habits, these mindset shifts that transform an ordinary man into someone unforgettable. And once you understand them, truly understand them, you will never see relationships, confidence, or masculinity the same way again. If you watch this until the end, you're going to walk away with clarity most men spend years searching for. So don't skip, don't click off, don't get distracted. What I'm about to reveal could shift the entire trajectory of your life as a man. Stay with me. This might be the most important message you hear this year. Calm confidence is the first thing people notice about a man, even before he speaks, even before he makes eye contact, even before he introduces himself. It's not loud, it's not flashy, and it's not something you can force. In fact, the moment you try to act calm, you're already betraying the fact that you're not. True calm comes from a man who has been shaped by life, not broken by it. It comes from someone who has faced storms and learned how to breathe through them, someone who doesn't collapse at the sight of pressure, but has become familiar with it, almost comfortable with it. And this is exactly why younger women notice it immediately. Because calm confidence is rare, extremely rare. Most people confuse calm with quietness, but they're not the same at all. Quiet people can be anxious, insecure, or uncertain. Calm people are internally organized. Their emotions don't bleed out into every conversation or situation. They don't crumble when they're misunderstood. They don't explode when something goes wrong. They don't rush to prove themselves. They don't run around trying to fix anyone's perception of them. Their value doesn't come from external validation, so nothing on the outside can shake them on the inside. That's what makes calm confidence magnetic. Younger women, consciously or unconsciously, are often exposed to men who oscillate between extremes, too loud, too insecure, too emotional, too reactive, too unsure. And then, suddenly, they encounter a man who moves differently, a man who listens first, speaks second, a man who doesn't interrupt or dominate, but also doesn't shrink, a man who carries himself like he knows something the rest of the room doesn't. That difference in energy is what creates the gravitational pull. But here's the deeper truth: calm confidence is not natural, it's cultivated. It's the result of emotional discipline. It comes from a man who has learned how to regulate his impulses. He doesn't let anger control him. He doesn't let fear manipulate him. He doesn't let desire blind him. He's not detached, he's composed. There's a level of psychological maturity that makes him hard to provoke and impossible to intimidate. This is why younger women sense safety around such a man, not the superficial safety of looks strong, but the emotional safety of is steady. Safety is not about physical protection. It's about emotional reliability. A calm man doesn't erupt at small things. He doesn't weaponize silence. He doesn't create emotional turbulence. He doesn't bring unnecessary drama into the dynamic. He has control over himself, and that's the highest form of power. What younger women find compelling is not that he's older in age, but that he's older in wisdom. They feel his presence, not because he's dominating the space, but because he's mastered the art of not wasting energy. A calm man doesn't chase attention. He doesn't fight for approval. He doesn't compete for validation. His internal world is already full. That fullness is what creates attraction. The irony is that many men try so hard to appear confident. They buy things, talk loud, flex status, exaggerate stories, try to come off as more successful or experienced. But none of that can replace emotional equilibrium. Calm confidence is subtle, and that subtlety is powerful. It's the kind of presence that makes others adjust themselves without him saying a word. People lower their voices. They straighten their posture. They become more intentional with their words. His calm changes the environment. And it's not because he's intimidating. It's because he's centered. When someone is deeply centered, they influence the emotional tone of the space. They bring grounding without forcing it. Younger women pick up on this because emotional sensitivity is often stronger at a younger age. They notice inconsistency. They notice insecurity. They notice instability. And when they meet a man who doesn't project any of that, it stands out like a light in a dark room. But calm confidence also has a deeper psychological root. It comes from a man who has accepted himself. Not in an arrogant way, not in a passive way, but in a deeply grounded way. He has made peace with his past. He has forgiven himself for his mistakes. He understands his strengths, but he also respects his limitations. He doesn't pretend to be invincible. He just doesn't fear vulnerability anymore. This authenticity is something younger women rarely see in their age group. It's refreshing, stabilizing, and highly attractive. A man like this is not desperate for connection. He can walk away from situations that don't align with his values. He doesn't cling. He doesn't beg. He doesn't attach himself emotionally to chaos. His calm comes from the fact that he trusts himself, and trust in oneself creates a kind of energy that makes others trust him too. This level of composure also allows him to communicate differently. He doesn't raise his voice to be heard. He doesn't argue to dominate. He doesn't debate to win. He speaks thoughtfully, with intention, and with clarity. His words land differently because they're not impulsive, they're considered. This makes interactions with him feel rich, meaningful, and grounded. Younger women don't choose these men because of age. They choose them because they feel emotionally nourished in their presence. These men bring depth, they bring wisdom, they bring security, they bring emotional clarity. And that combination is extremely rare in today's world. Calm confidence is the silent proof that a man has grown. It's the invisible language of self-mastery. And when a man carries that, it's not just younger women who notice, it's everyone. Remember this: the world listens to a man who doesn't shout, because his calm reveals the strength he doesn't need to display. And the closing truth is simple. A man who masters his emotions becomes a man who creates attraction without effort. Purpose is the quiet force that separates men who drift through life from men who move with intention. When a man has purpose, he doesn't walk into a room looking for approval, attention, or validation. He walks in carrying direction. And people feel that immediately. Younger women especially notice it, not because they're seeking some mentor-like figure, but because purpose creates emotional gravity. It gives a man a kind of psychological presence that cannot be imitated. You can fake confidence, you can fake charm, but you cannot fake purpose. It's the one thing that exposes itself through your actions, your discipline, your consistency, and the way you show up in the world. When a man lives with purpose, he doesn't waste energy chasing things that don't align with his mission. His time becomes valuable. His attention becomes selective. His decisions become deliberate. He doesn't jump from one distraction to another because he's anchored from within. You can't shake a man like that. You can't tempt him into living below his potential. You can't convince him to settle for mediocrity. His life is shaped by a vision that's bigger than momentary gratification. This is why younger women find such men compelling. It's not the age, it's the direction. They can sense that he knows who he is and where he's going. There's something psychologically stabilizing about a man who isn't lost. Most men live their lives like they're waiting for something to happen, but a purposeful man creates momentum. He doesn't rely on motivation, he relies on discipline. He doesn't rely on inspiration, he relies on structure. And that structure gives him clarity that others envy. You'll notice something interesting: men with purpose rarely feel the need to prove anything. They don't brag about their achievements. They don't inflate their value. Their life speaks for them. Their results speak for them. Their energy speaks for them. A man anchored in purpose doesn't chase attention because he already has direction. And people, including younger women, find direction profoundly attractive. Not because it's glamorous, but because it's grounded. Purpose also changes the way a man carries himself. It makes his movements intentional and his decisions stronger. He's not impulsive. He's not easily manipulated. He doesn't jump into relationships out of loneliness or fear. He chooses carefully because he understands that his mission requires emotional stability, not chaos. A purposeful man avoids drama not because he's distant, but because he simply cannot afford to waste energy on things that don't elevate him or support his growth. This self-protection is not selfish, it is maturity. Younger women sense the difference between a man who is running from his life and a man who is running towards something meaningful. The first type drains energy, the second type generates it. When a man is aligned with his purpose, he radiates a type of calm confidence that naturally complements the emotional rhythm of a younger woman. Purpose gives him focus, and focus gives him presence. That presence is what makes him stand out. Many men think they need external success to be purposeful: money, fame, status. But purpose isn't about material milestones. It's about direction. A man could be building a business, improving his health, mastering a skill, raising a family, learning a craft, or contributing to a mission bigger than himself. Purpose is not what you achieve, it's what you commit to. It's the thing that pulls you out of bed when you're tired. It's the thing that challenges you to be more disciplined. It's the thing that silences your excuses. Younger women don't fall for the achievements. They fall for the energy that achievements come from, the energy of discipline, focus, and self-mastery. A man with purpose also communicates differently. He speaks with clarity because his life has clarity. He's not confused about what he wants, so he doesn't confuse others. He's not searching for identity in relationships, so he doesn't burden women with filling the gaps in his self-worth. He doesn't project insecurity. He doesn't expect someone else to provide meaning. His purpose has already given him that. And because his life is already full, he becomes someone who adds value instead of extracting it. This is one of the deepest reasons younger women gravitate toward purposeful older men. They feel his emotional independence. He's not looking for a savior. He's not looking for someone to fill emptiness. He's looking for connection, not completion. That emotional independence makes him far more attractive than a man who treats relationships as an escape from his own life. Purpose also shapes his emotional stability. A man who has something to work toward doesn't crumble when something goes wrong. He understands adversity as part of the journey. He doesn't panic at every setback. He adjusts. He recalibrates. He moves forward. That resilience, born from purpose, is incredibly powerful. Younger women admire that strength, not the physical strength, but the psychological resilience. Anyone can lift weights, but not everyone can carry responsibility. And here's the philosophical core of it all. Purpose transforms a man's energy from reactive to creative. Most men are reactors. They respond to life. They react to circumstances. They adjust to conditions. But a man with purpose creates conditions. He shapes his environment. He builds his path. He moves from being a passenger to becoming the driver of his own existence. Younger women don't see him as older. They see him as evolved. Purposeful men don't chase youth. They attract it. They don't cling to the past. They build the future. They don't slow down. They refine themselves. And that refinement is what makes them compelling. If there's one message everyone should leave with, it's this. A man without purpose feels empty to everyone around him, but a man with purpose becomes impossible to ignore. Let your direction become your attraction. When a man reaches a certain level of maturity, he stops playing games, not because he's too old for them, but because he's evolved beyond them. And this is one of the most overlooked reasons younger women find such men so compelling. It's not the age gap itself, it's the psychological gap. It's the difference between insecurity and certainty, between confusion and clarity, between following trends and setting standards. A man who has developed a sense of self-respect doesn't engage in emotional negotiations with people who don't value him. He doesn't try to win someone's interest. He doesn't bend his boundaries to avoid losing someone. He simply stands firm in who he is, and that steadiness becomes its own form of attraction. Most people think that attraction is about charm, appearance, or material status. But in reality, one of the strongest forms of attraction is certainty. Certainty in who you are, what you want, and what you will not tolerate. Younger women pick up on this instantly because emotional inconsistency is one of the biggest turn-offs at any age. Immature men send mixed signals, change their behavior under pressure, or mold themselves into whatever they think the other person wants. But a man who has standards communicates the opposite message. I know myself, I know my value, and I don't need validation to confirm it. That self-respect sets a tone before the conversation even begins. There's something incredibly powerful about a man who does not approach relationships from a place of scarcity. He's not auditioning. He's not trying to prove he's worthy. He's not calculating how to be more likable. Instead, he's evaluating whether the dynamic aligns with his principles. And this shift in perspective, where the man is assessing rather than seeking approval, changes the entire psychological dynamic. Younger women feel the difference between a man who is trying to impress them and a man who is simply being himself. One is anxious energy, the other is grounded energy. This grounded energy expresses itself in the way he communicates. A man with standards does not sugarcoat things to avoid conflict. He communicates directly and respectfully. He doesn't manipulate with silence or dramatize with intensity. He doesn't use emotional push and pull tactics to create artificial interest. Everything he says is consistent with what he does, and that consistency creates trust. Younger women are used to men who say one thing and do another. So when they meet a man who stands by his word, the contrast is striking. Integrity becomes magnetic. But standards are not just about what he expects from others. They're also about what he expects from himself. A man who holds himself to a high standard in his work, his habits, and his relationships is demonstrating something deeper: self-governance. And people naturally respect someone who governs himself well. Younger women respect men who show that they are capable of discipline, self-control, and accountability. These qualities create emotional safety because they show that the man is not ruled by impulses or insecurity. Another important aspect is that a man with standards doesn't rush into emotional intimacy, not because he's cold or detached, but because he knows the importance of compatibility. He doesn't get swept away by superficial attraction. He takes time to understand values, communication styles, emotional maturity, and long-term alignment. This patience is refreshing to younger women, especially in a culture where everything moves too fast, where people jump into relationships before they know themselves. A man with standards slows things down, not to create distance, but to make sure everything aligns naturally. And here's something people rarely talk about. A man's standards are a direct reflection of the relationship he has with himself. If he accepts disrespect, inconsistency, or emotional chaos, it's because he carries chaos within. But if he maintains peace, structure, and clarity, it's because he's already doing the internal work. Younger women feel that internal order. They feel the stability in his presence. They feel the emotional intelligence in the way he responds. They feel the strength in the boundaries he sets. And that internal structure makes him more compelling than someone who relies solely on charm or appearance. Games, on the other hand, come from insecurity. They come from fear, the fear of not being chosen, the fear of not being good enough, the fear of losing someone. So when a man stops playing games, it's not because he lost interest in romance, it's because he lost interest in fear. He no longer needs to hide behind tactics. He no longer needs to manipulate outcomes. He's free from the emotional immaturity that traps so many men in cycles of inconsistency. This freedom is what younger women find so attractive. A man who doesn't need to be chased, convinced, or reassured. A man who knows his worth without inflating it. A man who stands firm without being rigid. Someone who doesn't tolerate disrespect, not because he's defensive, but because he's dignified. His standards protect his peace. And peace is one of the greatest forms of value a man can bring into any connection. What makes this even more compelling is that his standards create emotional clarity. The younger woman doesn't have to guess his intentions or decode his behavior. He is transparent. He is stable. He is consistent. These qualities are rare, and rarity always attracts attention. A man with standards elevates the entire dynamic, not by controlling the other person, but by controlling himself. The irony is that most men think lowering their standards makes them more likable. But the opposite is true. The clearer a man is about what he wants and what he cannot accept, the more respect he commands. Younger women respect men who respect themselves. They admire men who protect their time, energy, and emotional space. And they gravitate toward men who know how to lead, not in a controlling way, but in a confident, self-directed way. In the end, standards are not about being demanding. They're about being intentional. They're about choosing alignment over chaos, depth over superficiality, and self-respect over temporary validation. A man who understands this becomes rare, and rarity has its own attraction. Remember this, when a man treats himself with dignity, the world around him adjusts. Boundaries aren't walls. They're invitations for the right people to meet you at the right level. There's something profoundly attractive about a man who refuses to let time define him. Not because he's trying to be young again, but because he's actively evolving. Growth becomes his identity. And this is where so many people misunderstand the dynamic between older men and younger women. The attraction isn't rooted in age difference. It's rooted in the difference in development. A man who invests in himself continues to expand mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and even physically. He does not stagnate. He does not decay in spirit. He does not let life harden him or dull him. He becomes ageless because his growth is continuous. Younger women notice the difference immediately. They can sense when a man is still curious about life, still learning, still improving, still hungry for understanding. That kind of energy doesn't age. It's the energy of someone who's alive internally, not just existing. Most people stop evolving at a certain point. They settle into routines, habits, mental patterns, and emotional loops. They repeat the same days, the same thoughts, the same complaints, the same excuses. But a man who invests in himself refuses to be trapped in monotony. He seeks expansion, and expansion is deeply attractive. Self-improvement for these men isn't performative. It's not a trend or a temporary phase. It's woven into the way they live. They read not to impress, but to understand the world more deeply. They train their bodies not out of insecurity, but out of respect for their physical vessel. They work on their communication, emotional awareness, and self-control because they value harmony in their relationships. Their growth is holistic. Younger women feel this balance. They sense that he is not merely surviving, he is cultivating himself. This investment in self also shows up in how these men adapt. They aren't stuck in outdated mindsets or rigid worldviews. They aren't intimidated by new ideas, evolving perspectives, or unfamiliar experiences. They approach the world with openness instead of fear. Younger women find this refreshing because many men, even young ones, become mentally rigid early in life. But a man who keeps improving remains mentally flexible. He doesn't cling to old identities. He evolves beyond them. And evolution keeps him vibrant. One of the most compelling aspects of constant self-improvement is emotional maturity. A man who grows consistently becomes more aware of his internal landscape. He understands his patterns, his triggers, his wounds, his strengths, and his blind spots. He doesn't project his insecurities onto people around him. He doesn't let his past dictate his present. He doesn't let ego sabotage meaningful connections. Younger women sense this emotional regulation instantly. He becomes a safe harbor, not because he's passive or perfect, but because he's self-aware. A man who works on himself isn't fighting internal wars. He's cultivating internal peace, and that peace radiates naturally. Physical improvement plays a role too, not in terms of vanity, but vitality. A man who stays active, disciplined, and health-conscious carries a different energy. Strength, endurance, posture, and presence are physical reflections of internal discipline. Younger women see a man who respects himself enough to care for his body. It signals longevity, resilience, and vitality, not the superficial kind, but the grounded, sustainable kind that comes from consistency. And perhaps the deepest part of this self-improvement is identity. Many men cling to an old version of themselves. Their career labels, their past achievements, their mistakes, their stories. But men who evolve refuse to be defined by their history. They don't say, "This is who I am, take it or leave it." Instead, they say, "I am becoming someone better every day." That mindset is magnetic. It creates emotional freshness. Younger women sense that they are dealing with a man who won't become stagnant in a relationship. Someone who will continue to grow with them, challenge them, and inspire them. Continuous growth also affects how these men handle relationships. They don't enter connections expecting someone to heal them or complete them. They enter from a place of fullness. Their self-improvement builds emotional independence. They choose to give rather than take, to contribute rather than consume. This independence is compelling because it creates a dynamic based on mutual value, not emotional dependence. Men who invest in themselves have a different type of confidence, not loud, not performative, but internal. It comes from competence, from discipline, from knowing they are moving forward. This quiet confidence is difficult to replicate because it's the result of a long-term relationship with self-mastery. A man who grows feels grounded because he's in alignment with his own potential. And alignment is one of the most attractive traits a man can possess. But there's something even more philosophical behind this. Growth keeps a man young because growth keeps him conscious. The moment a man stops learning, he starts aging, not physically, spiritually. His curiosity fades, his openness declines, his energy drops. But a man who continues expanding refuses to shrink into the smallness of comfort. He remains mentally sharp, emotionally aware, and spiritually attuned. This makes him feel timeless. Younger women are not responding to his age. They're responding to his aliveness. Continuous self-improvement shows up in his conversations, his worldview, his habits, his goals, and the way he carries himself. He brings depth, insight, perspective, and wisdom to interactions. He's not trying to entertain, he's trying to elevate. And elevation is magnetic. It's the kind of energy that makes others want to grow too. A man who invests in himself becomes a man others want to invest in. His presence creates inspiration. His lifestyle sets an example. His growth becomes contagious. And younger women are drawn to this because growth creates emotional nourishment. They feel fed, not drained. They feel expanded, not limited. They feel uplifted, not weighed down. In the end, it's simple: a man who grows becomes a man who glows. And that glow has nothing to do with age. Remember this: if you keep evolving, life keeps opening doors, and people will always be drawn to a man who never stops becoming.